Welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In this video, we're going to be talking all about tactical support squads. We're going to be talking about the size of the squad, the equipment it can use, the characters that can join it, what transport you can use, and also all of the weapons that you could equip for this unit. But before we do that, if you enjoy my content, please do drop me a like and a subscribe on YouTube. And if there is anything in the video that you'd like to discuss, please do leave me a comment or with any feedback as well. That would be great, and I do try to respond to all comments on YouTube. So on with the show. First of all, we're going to talk about the squad itself, and we're going to talk about squad size. So upsize to having the squad bigger is that when you first buy the squad, you basically pay 17 points per model, and when you make the squad bigger, you only pay 12 points per model. So making the squad bigger is quite efficient in terms of model points costs, and you do get more of a benefit from reactions when the squad's bigger as well. So if someone charges you and you use your Overwatch reaction, getting 10 models firing from that is obviously much better than getting 5 models firing from that in terms of efficiency, because you've only got one reaction in the phase generally. On the downside, it's a lot more points for someone to be able to focus their fire on, or also for them to just pin if they manage to pin the unit. And you've only got one reaction as well, so it's much easier to bait that reaction out. Then we've got the equipment options. So this is a common question I see online, is what equipment is good to use on these squads. Now I think that Artificer Armor is good, as it always is, but it's only really a must-take on your larger size squads, where it becomes much more important to have that option to have a 2+ save character in case you get shot by some big guns or lots of shots from smaller guns. Most of the other equipment on this squad, in my opinion, is not really worth it. You don't have the range to make use of the augury scanner reactions necessarily with Interceptor, and being immune to the night fight and range limitation is much less important for these squads because they have much shorter range weapons. It does change a little bit on some of the longer range weapons where you may want to take an augury scanner, but generally you probably want to skip it and keep the squad a bit cheaper. And the other options really don't work so well with this squad. The Nuncio Vox you probably have on a different unit in the army, maybe a unit that's less likely to die, and there's not really any need to use a Legion Vexilla either. There's mostly just one unit that is worth joining this unit as a character, so most of the consoles don't really work so well with this unit. The special characters, etc., don't really work with a unit of what ultimately are suicide guns, short-range guns. The Apothecary is pretty decent though. If you've got a big unit of 10, Apothecaries are always worth it once a unit gets to a certain size, so it is worth considering that. On the flip side, if you just think they're going to die anyway, regardless of having an Apothecary, this is also something you can skip to keep the unit nice and cheap. One of the most important things on these squads is transport. So it's almost essential on most of the weapon options because these squads are very effective, but they're very expensive and they're very short-ranged. So you're almost always going to want to take that Rhino to make sure that they get to shoot what they want to shoot in the range that they want to shoot it at as well. Alternatively, you can put them in whatever your Rite of War allows, so some Rite of War allow different transports, or alternate modes of deployment, like reserve-based deployment, deep strike, and so on. You can use one of them instead. But either way, you generally are always going to want a way to deliver this unit because of the shorter range of the weapons. So let's talk about the weapons themselves, but before we do that, let's just have a quick chat about the comparisons that I'm about to make. So one of the main things that people want answered is, are tactical squads good when you compare them to heavy support squads? Now, heavy support squads are really good in this edition of the game. They get a lot of guns, they're very long range, and they're very well priced for what they bring. Tactical support squads naturally compare to this because these are basically the two ways to get Space Marines with a lot of guns, so they're in the same niche, Marines with guns. There's going to be a lot of comparisons in the following weapons to the heavy support squad, and that's natural. Bear in mind, tactical support squads are troops and heavy support squads are heavy support. Heavy support is a much more contested slot. You've got Leviathan Dreadnoughts in there, Deredio Dreadnoughts, all of the cool tanks, so there's a lot more competition for that slot. Also as well, Legion specific upgrades use tactical support squads rather, a little bit more as well. So Salamanders make more use of it with their flamers, Death Guard with Alchem flamers, Iron Hands being able to switch out flamers for grav guns. These all use the tactical support squad more, which makes it goes up in value in certain circumstances as well. So while we're making these comparisons, which are generally in favour of the heavy support squads, do bear in mind that there are some trade-offs for taking them though. Let's talk about the Flamer first then. So they're pretty cheap. They're cheap-ish. They're just the cost of the model. So 85 points for the squad, 12 points for everyone after that. And they are great versus big squads. These templates, when they're hitting squads of 20, can really get you a lot of automatic hits. And even on squads of 10, you can easily get 6, 7, 8 automatic hits if you can position them well. So Flamers are pretty good. And if you are expecting big blobs of tactical marines or despoilers or assault squads, these are a pretty good option, but they do compare quite poorly to heavy flamer equipped heavy support squads, which are almost the same cost, so 15 points per model compared to 12, but they've got an extra point of strength, which makes them an awful lot better. So these don't compare great to heavy flamer equipped heavy assault marines, heavy support marines, but of course you might not always have the slot available for them, and in that case the flamer is a pretty decent option. And a squad of Flamer Arm Marines does look cool. And next we've got the Rotor Cannon. Now the Rotor Cannon is one of the more unique weapons that is also good in this edition, and it is probably the main reason why you might find yourself wanting to take tactical support squads. So firstly, it's an assault weapon, and it's got 4 shots, so it's got a good volume of fire. Now it comes with pinning and shell shock 1, so pinning is not that hard to find in the game. But shell shock is pretty hard to find, and pinning alone generally won't pin most Space Marine units. They will generally pass their leadership test, but shell shock rarely makes a big difference. So a normal unit of Marines that's lost its Sergeant is leadership 7, so it will still mostly pass its pinning tests. You hit it with a shell shock weapon, it will fail on average instead. So shell shock is quite hard to find. These have also got a good range. They're 30-inch range. So there's no Rhino needed for these, which does help to keep their costs down. They are, for what they do, because they're strength 3, a little bit pricey in some ways. It really depends what you're going to do with them. You don't take these to kill things. You take these to pin things. So they're not really that expensive, especially given how unique that ability is. And with some legions, for example, Night Lords, you want every source of pinning that you can get because it helps take advantage of their fear, for example. So these are definitely a good option and one of the better reasons to take a tactical support squad. And if you're interested in the maths, if you're shooting at a normal Space Marine unit with a 3+ save, 4 Rotor Cannons will generally force a pin and test, even on below average rolls. 3 is still almost enough to force a pin and test on average. So units of 5 of these are plenty enough to be forcing your opponent to take a pin and test every turn, and that's only going to cost you 25? It's only going to cost you 110 points, which is pretty decent as things go. So next we've got the Volkite Charger. So these are kind of analogous to bolters for me. They are a little bit longer range than a rapid fire and bolter, so they've got a 15-inch range. They are assault, not that you would probably want to charge these into combat after shooting anyway, but they are strength 5 and they are deflagrate, so they're a bit better than a bolter. And the way I figure out if these are a good weapon, these Volkite Chargers, is for 10 of these, which is 45 points more than the tactical squad, or 145 points, you get 10 Charger Arm Marines. So you're basically paying 2.1 points per Charger. So they're like a slightly better tactical Marine in a lot of ways, but they do lose Fury of the Legion in that comparison, and also Heart of the Legion, and they are a denial unit, not a scoring unit. So are they amazing compared to a tactical squad, especially since they both go in the troop slot? Probably not, but they are an interesting little side grade, and if you use some of these to add some variety to your force and you just want to put some cool different weapons on a bunch of 10 Marines that are going to do a similar-ish job, they're not a terrible option, as well as, despite the fact that they might not be too exciting either. Then we've got the Volkite Caliver. Now this is quite an interesting weapon. So it's heavy, it's 30-inch range, so you don't necessarily need a Rhino with this, and it is 3 shots, strength 6. So it compares very poorly actually to the Volkite Caliver, and that is because the Volkite Caliver is 5 points for 5 shots. This is costing you 10 points for only 3 shots. So in actual fact, 5 guys with Volkite Calivers is 10 points more than 5 guys with Volkite Culverins, and you get 60% of the shots and at minus 15-inch range as well. Now that's a really bad deal. Now these are definitely too expensive, definitely overpriced. I'm not really sure what this weapon is for or why you would use it. Yes, they do look cool, but I think if you want to get some Volkite variety into your army, you're probably better sticking with the Volkite Chargers and avoiding using this weapon. So next is the Plasma Gun, a classic Warhammer weapon, always been super good at killing Marines, always been a weapon of choice. Toned down a little bit in this edition, but still a very good option for shooting at elites, whilst also fighting in the midfield. So whilst the heavy support equivalent of this, like the Plasma Cannon or some of the other heavy weapons that you might use to shoot at enemy Marines or enemy elite Marines, are mostly heavy weapons, these are rapid fire. They can move around the battlefield and be a denial unit while shooting elites. They're a bit on the expensive side to do that. At 10 points per plasma gun, they're not particularly cheap, but that is a role they can play, which heavy support squads can't, and it's important to find the reasons to take these, I think. So in terms of output, a plasma gun is approximately the same as a plasma cannon, more or less. Plasma cannon, obviously, against some units, particularly heavy units like Terminators, where you really might want to shoot them with your, plasma weapons so you can breach their armor. Plasma cannons do grant them a reroll via the heavy trait. So when you're shooting them with them plasma cannon blasts, they'll be getting like a 4+ invulnerable save with a reroll, which actually makes plasma cannons worse at shooting those elite units. So the plasma gun is a better option in that situation. But the plasma cannon is probably better against big units, like big units of Space Marines and that kind of stuff, so that's probably their role. Also, Get Hot is worse on the plasma gun than it is on the plasma cannon, because obviously you're rolling more dice, so ideally you're rolling 2 dice each with a plasma gun because they're rapid firing, where a plasma cannon's only rolling 1. So plasma guns are a good option, probably still one of the better options for shooting at enemy elite troops, particularly those with a 2+ save, but they are certainly not cheap doing it either, so it's something to bear in mind when you're deciding if you're going to take this unit or not. Alright, and then Meltaguns. So Meltaguns are very pricey, 15 points per gun. So 5 of these guys in a Rhino is 195 points, which is really expensive. Now they can fight midfield, much like the plasma guns, because they're mobile, they can move around while firing, but they have limited opportunity for denial of objectives in a lot of ways if we're considering that an advantage, because their range is so extremely short, and therefore, whilst they can deny, they might not be able to actually get to shoot things while doing it at the same time, so it's kind of iffy as an advantage. Their anti-armor is very good, but is it worth the cost? 195 points for 5 of them in a Rhino. They do compare very poorly, I think, ultimately to heavy weapon squads in the anti-vehicle role, so you could get 5 las cannons for 150 points. You basically get 7 las cannons which is 200 points for the cost of 5 of these in a Rhino, which is not great. And you could get a bunch of multi-melters as well. You can get quite a lot of multi-melters for the same points, and even though they are heavy and a bit less mobile, they've got double the range as well. So I don't think Meltaguns do super well, really. I think they're just a little bit too pricey. If you are going to use them, though, and a unit of these is cool and does add some variety to your army, they're probably better as like a reserve counterpunch unit, so maybe you keep them in the Rhino hidden behind a building, you wait for the opponent's dreadnought or vehicles to come closer to you, where you can then maybe go and drop your Meltagun Marines out. They can blow the thing up that's close to them, and maybe they will survive the return fire from the enemy army to go and do it again in another turn, or at least get another round of shooting, and is probably a better way to think about playing these. So, in summary, what are the best ways to really leverage this unit? What are the weapon options you can put on this unit that actually make it worth taking versus a different unit that might do a similar role? Well, the Rotor Cannon for sure, because it's a very unique weapon in the game, and this is really the only way to get lots of rotor cannons into your army. And also the plasma gun as well as still the premier way of gunning down 2+ armoured save units as well, or just normal Space Marines too. They're both good ways to use this unit. Reasonably effective weapons that do add some variety to your army, even if they're not necessarily super optimal. Meltaguns, Flamers, Volkite Chargers, all of those options are okay, especially when you figure in that the competing heavy support squad options for those might be full of slots, and you could maybe use this slot instead for a slightly less efficient, but still cool and still usable unit. The only thing I think ultimately that is a little bit too pricey is the Volkite Caliver. It's just a little bit too many points for what it does. It's a heavy weapon, so it's a bit static, and it compares even more directly with those heavy weapon squads that can just do a lot more with the points that you would pay for the Volkite Caliver. So where does this leave the squad in general? Well, I think fair to say the biggest issue that the tactical support squad faces is that it's just expensive. The weapons are expensive. They're more expensive than the weapons on heavy support squads, usually for less firepower. Even though the men are a little bit less expensive, the cost of the weapons actually makes them overtake the cost of the heavy weapon squads. And unlike heavy weapon squads, this squad has got to get closer to the enemy generally. Even the weapons with a longer range are only 30, as opposed to the 45s, the 72s on the heavy support squad. And because this squad's got to get very close to the enemy, it means it's in more danger, which really compounds how expensive they are, because your opponent is going to shoot these or charge things into them to get rid of them, because they do bring a lot of firepower, but they're very expensive, so it's like a piñata for your opponent to pop and put himself in a really good situation. I think generally the weapons are just a little bit bizarrely overpriced. Almost everything in the unit, I think, weapons-wise, could probably be 5 points less per weapon. So plasma guns could probably stay at 10 points, but they'd be pretty good at 5. Meltaguns could definitely come down by 5 points. Volkite Calivers could definitely come down by 5 points as well. The unit's just a little bit too expensive for what it does, and the drawbacks attached to it, especially since you generally have to put it so close and you need to buy that Rhino to make so many of these things work. So ultimately, they're a bit of a mediocre alternative to heavy support squads. They're not bad in all cases, necessarily. They may fill a role sometimes if your heavy support slot is full and you want to bring more Marines with guns. There's less competition in that troop slot. And again, the rotor cannons and plasma guns are pretty decent at what they do, even if they are not necessarily the cheapest things you can buy. And the good thing about this squad, though, is it does add some variety to your force. I'm very keen on finding these units that are maybe not the best units in the world, but you can still use them to give your army some variety. Paint some different guns, put some different things in there. They look cool on the tabletop, and importantly, they are good enough to be usable, even if you might not want to run too many of them in your army. So, maybe you add one squad of these to your army just to give you something a little bit different to do, even if your army is, therefore not the most optimal. And that's the end of the video. I hope that the information's been useful to you guys. I hope it's been an interesting discussion and that you've enjoyed it. As always, if you do enjoy the content, please do like or subscribe on YouTube. It really makes a huge difference. If there's anything that you would like to discuss, please throw it in the comments. I'd also welcome any feedback that you've got on the episode as well. So until next time, guys, thank you very much for watching, and bye-bye.